You're grieving, not just for what you lost, but for who you were, the version of you that existed before the crisis, before the change, before everything shifted. And that grief is real, valid, important, because that person is gone. You can't go back to being them, no matter how much you want to. But Rumi would tell you something that sounds harsh, but is actually liberating. That person had to go, not because they were bad or wrong, but because they were too small, too limited, too constrained. And you, the real you, the larger you, couldn't fit in that form anymore. So you broke open. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels like death, because it is death, the death of the old self, but not your death, your rebirth. And the pain you're feeling isn't because you're broken, it's because you're breaking open, making space, expanding, becoming. Think about how you felt before everything changed. You had a sense of who you were, your identity, your role, your story. You knew yourself, or at least, you thought you did. And then something happened, a loss, a betrayal, a failure, a crisis, and suddenly, that sense of self shattered. The person you thought you were couldn't handle what happened, couldn't fit the new reality, couldn't continue in the same form, and you've been trying to put that person back together, to recover who you were, to return to normal, but it's not working, because that person is gone, and somewhere deep inside, you know this, and it terrifies you, because if you're not who you were, then who are you? If the identity you built over decades is gone, what's left? And this unknown, this not knowing who you are anymore, feels like annihilation, like you've lost yourself, like you're broken beyond repair. But Rumi experienced this exact thing. At 37, his entire sense of self shattered. Everything he believed about himself, his life, his purpose, it all fell apart. And for a time, he was lost, disoriented, grieving the man he had been. But through that grief, through that breaking, something emerged. Not a return to his old self, but something entirely new, something larger, truer, more alive. And he realized that he hadn't broken apart. He had broken open. There's a difference, a crucial difference. When something breaks apart, it's destroyed. The pieces scatter. The function is lost. It's ruin. But when something breaks open, it's transformation. A seed breaks open to become a plant. An egg breaks open to release life. A chrysalis breaks open to free a butterfly. The breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning of something that couldn't exist in the previous form. And you're not breaking apart, even though it feels that way. You're breaking open. Your old form, your old identity, your old understanding of yourself. It couldn't contain what you're becoming, so it had to crack, had to shatter, had to make space. And yes, this is painful, deeply painful, because you're losing something familiar, something you built, something you knew. But you're not losing yourself, you're losing the container, and what's inside is finally getting room to expand. Rumi said something profound about this. He said the wound is where the light enters, not metaphorically, actually. The cracks in your sense of self, the places where you broke, those aren't flaws. They're not evidence of failure. They're openings, places where something new can enter, where truth can penetrate, where growth can happen. And the more you try to seal those cracks, the more you try to return to your old form, the more you resist the very transformation trying to occur. But this requires letting go. And letting go of who you were is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Because even if that version of you was limited, even if it was causing you pain, it was familiar. You knew how to be that person. You knew the rules, the patterns, the story, and now those are gone. And you're standing in unknown territory. And it's terrifying. Rumi watched people resist this breaking open their entire lives. They would cling to their old identity, their old story, their old way of being, even when it no longer fit, even when it was clearly causing suffering, because the unknown felt more dangerous than the familiar pain. And they stayed small, stayed limited, stayed in forms that had long since become prisons, not because they weren't capable of transformation, but because they were too afraid to let go of who they had been. But you can't become larger while trying to stay the same shape. Something has to give, and what gives is the old form, the old identity, the old self. And this breaking, this shattering, it's not punishment, it's not failure, it's growth. You've outgrown your old form, and your being knows this, which is why the breaking is happening, not to destroy you, but to free you. Think about what you're grieving. Really think about it. Is it the actual person you were, or is it the certainty, the knowing, the sense of having yourself figured out, because often, what we miss most isn't who we were but the comfort of thinking we knew who we were. And now that's gone, and we're faced with the terrifying reality that we don't know. We're undefined, unformed, in process, and that feels like death. But Rumi would say this is where real life begins, not in the having yourself figured out, but in the not knowing, in the breaking open, in the space between who you were and who you're becoming. This is where transformation lives. This is where truth emerges. This is where you meet yourself for the first time. Not the constructed self, not the identity you built to survive, but the actual you, the one that was too large for the old form, the one that's been waiting for space to emerge. And this process isn't clean. It's not neat. It doesn't follow a plan. You don't break open and immediately know what's coming next. There's a period of chaos, of not knowing, of feeling lost, and during this time, you'll want to panic. You'll want to grab onto something, anything, to give you a sense of identity, a sense of self. But if you grab too quickly, if you try to define yourself too soon, you'll just create another small container, another limited form, and you'll have to break open again later. So you have to learn to sit in the not knowing, to be comfortable with the discomfort of undefined, to trust that something is forming even when you can't see it yet. And this trust is hard, because everything in you wants certainty, wants to know, wants to land somewhere stable. But Rumi understood that stability comes not from landing but from trusting the process of transformation itself, from knowing that the breaking open is purposeful, that the pain has meaning, that the grief is necessary, because you have to grieve the old self. You have to let yourself mourn who you were, not to stay stuck in that grief, but to acknowledge the loss, to honor what was, to say goodbye, because if you skip this step, if you try to move forward without mourning, you'll carry the ghost of your old self with you, always trying to return, always pulling you back, always making you feel like you're failing because you can't be who you were. But you're not supposed to be who you were. That person served their purpose. They got you this far. They survived what needed to be survived. They learned what needed to be learned, and now they're done. And you can be grateful for them while also releasing them. You can honor who they were while also accepting that they're gone. And what's coming is larger, truer, more aligned with your actual being. But it requires space, and that space is created through the breaking, through the cracks, through the wounds, and the more you resist the breaking, the more painful it becomes. But the more you surrender to it, the more you trust it, the more natural it feels. Not easy, but natural, like something that was always going to happen, like something that needed to happen. Rumi talked about this surrender, about the moment you stop fighting the transformation and start flowing with it. And he said that's when the real magic happens. When you stop trying to put yourself back together and start allowing yourself to be remade. When you stop mourning the death and start noticing the birth. When you stop asking why this happened and start asking what wants to emerge, because something is trying to emerge. Through those cracks, through those breaks, through those wounds, a truer version of you, a larger capacity, a deeper wisdom, a more authentic presence. But it can't emerge while you're clutching the old form. While you're trying to seal the cracks, while you're attempting to return to who you were. You have to let the old form go, completely, and this feels like letting yourself go, like giving up, like surrender in the worst sense, but it's actually surrender in the best sense. It's releasing what no longer serves to make room for what wants to come. It's trusting that you're not breaking apart but breaking open, and that what emerges will be more you than you've ever been. And here's the truth that Rumi discovered. You were never actually the person you thought you were. That was a construction, a story, an identity you built to navigate the world, and it worked for a time. But it was always too small, always a limitation, always a container rather than the essence. And now the container is breaking, and you're terrified because you think the container is you. But it's not. The essence was always there, larger than any form, deeper than any identity. And now it's finally getting space to express itself. So the grief you feel for your old self, it's real, but it's also misplaced, because you're not mourning yourself. You're mourning a costume, a role, a story. And yes, you wore it for so long that it felt like you, but it never was. And now you're being given the chance to meet your actual self, not the constructed one, the real one, the one that was waiting beneath, the one that's too large for any single form. And this is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because you don't know this self yet. You haven't met them. You can't predict them. You can't control them. But liberating because you no longer have to maintain the old form. You no longer have to fit into something too small. You no longer have to pretend or perform or protect an identity that was never fully true. You're breaking open, and through those cracks, through those wounds, through those breaks, light is entering, truth is entering, your actual self is entering, and it's larger than you imagined, more capable than you believed, more alive than you've ever been. But you have to let the old form shatter completely. You have to stop trying to put it back together. You have to trust that what's breaking isn't you, it's your container, and containers are meant to be outgrown. Rumi spent the rest of his life teaching about this process, about the breaking open, about the death that isn't death, about the transformation that requires loss. And he said the most important thing you can do during this time is trust. Trust that the breaking has purpose. Trust that the pain is meaningful. Trust that you're not falling apart but expanding. And trust that who you're becoming is worth the grief of who you were. Because you're not broken. You were never broken. You're breaking open, making space, expanding beyond the old form. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's disorienting. Yes, it feels like loss. But it's not loss. It's transformation. And on the other side of this breaking, on the other side of this grief, there's a version of you that's been waiting your entire life to emerge. Larger, truer, more aligned, more alive. And that version is worth every crack, every wound, every moment of not knowing who you are, because they know, and soon, you will too. The breaking open isn't the end of you, it's the beginning, and the pain you feel isn't evidence of damage, it's evidence of growth. So let yourself grieve, let yourself break, let yourself not know, because, through the not knowing, through the breaking, through the grief, you're becoming, and what you're becoming is more you than you've ever been. You just have to trust the cracks. They're not destroying you, they're setting you free.